G'day Year 12 and welcome to another YouTube lesson. Today we're taking a look at influences again of human resources, and these are things that impact, have an effect on a business, in particular HR. Now we're looking at four different influences today. Economic, technological, social, which includes changing work patterns and living standards, and ethics and CSR, corporate social responsibility. Now, as I've been saying the whole way through, we must define the syllabus dot point, but also say how each of these things are influences. It's that second part that is really, really important. So the first dot point we're looking at is economic. Now, economic refers to the state of the economy and the economic cycle, the upturn, the boom in the economy, and the downturn, the recession, like the GFC in terms of the economy. Now, we have to have a think about how this impacts upon a business, specifically human resources. So in terms of HR, if we have a downturn in the economy, it's nasty. It means that businesses will be shedding, getting rid of workers, and therefore HR needs to go through the separations process. On the flip side, if there's a massive boom, then they'll be using the acquisition process. They'll be acquiring, recruiting many workers. So it fundamentally has a big influence on human resources. Now, the next dot point is technological. Technological refers to new advances in machines and other technology that can be used within the workplace. Now, the best example we can give for technology is a thing called capital labor substitution. Now, what is this? I've mentioned it before. Capital refers to, in this sense, machinery. It's got another meaning for finance, but we'll get to that with finance. So it refers to machinery. Labor refers to the workers. Substitution, the swap. So capital labor substitution, you are getting rid of workers and replacing them with futuristic robots. Okay, so you'll have machines taking over the jobs of workers. That's not so far-fetched. That's not so future tech type stuff. It's happening all the time these days. And in the coming decades, we will see huge amounts of these things happening. Now, how does that impact upon, influence human resources? Again, a massive influence, because workers are needing to lose their jobs. That's the role of HR. They need to be able to strategically account for this, and they also need to think about, can they retrain workers into another area? Can they or will they need to retrench workers? And they need to follow the legal aspects of that. All right, the next influence we have here is social. Now we've got changing work patterns under social, and also we have living standards under social as well. Now, in terms of social, we're looking at society and the changes that occur and how that impacts upon human resource management. The Australian workplace are now incredibly diverse, and that's representative of our general society and culture. Australia is one of the most multicultural countries on earth. There are many different ethnicities. We're also seeing far more women within the workplace. Now, the ratio of men to women has not largely changed in Australia, but there are now, and over the last decade or so, far more women entering the workplace than used to a generation ago. A good trend. And we're also seeing more differing contracts from full-time, permanent full-time, to permanent part-time, we just call part-time, or casual, ever-increasing casual employments. As an old labour man, that's a bad thing to see, I feel. Okay, probably good for business, and HR, not so good for the employee. And this notion, this changing of contracts, is called the casualisation of the workforce, often called flexibility. Again, good for business usually, not so good for the worker. We're also seeing social influences impact on how the employer must manage the workplace. Now, if we take a look at changing work patterns, as I said before, there are now more women within the workplace and more different varying cultures and ethnicities. In addition to that, we see that there's much more people wanting flexible working hours because we're seeing a greying of the population. That is, people are getting older on average and they're still wanting to work a little bit. So they want very flexible, at that older age, flexible working conditions and hours. Now, this influence has an influence on employers because they have to accommodate for this. I.e., women now receive maternity leave, and in many cases, like Department of Education, paid maternity leave. So it has a big influence on a business because back in the day, you'd say to a lady who fell pregnant, congratulations, here's your essentially maternity party, and you'd be gone. No pay, nothing. These days, rightly so, men and women, especially women, are able to receive this type of entitlement. Their job is secure for a period of time to come back to. HR's influence because it must take into account of these things. In terms of, say, changing cultures, certain religions require prayer at certain times. Businesses need to be accommodating for this and take these things into account. In terms of mature workers, with that greying of the population, another social trend we've seen. Okay, businesses are having to provide greater flexibility if they want to keep those mature, wise, experienced workers within the workplace. All of these influences have a massive impact on how HR operates. And again, like all things, you might be asked to evaluate these influences. And you'd use the HR effectiveness criteria to see whether Qantas or Apple or Art of Gelato are doing a good or bad job at meeting the effectiveness criteria. Now, under social, we have living standards. Living standards are about how much disposable income and possessions individual own or have. How does this matter? It's a bit of an abstract one. Now, depending on the occupation, there are large differences in pay and therefore much greater living standards even within a country like Australia. Now, living standards are an influence on HR because of two ways. Firstly, it's what motivates employees, their pay. As much as I love teaching you guys, I've got to give you the tip. If I didn't get paid $115,000 plus superannuation, etc., to be a head teacher, there's no way I'm coming in for free. So it motivates the workers, and therefore employers can take advantage of this to increase HR productivity. They know what they pay the worker relates to their living standard, and greater pay, greater living standard, increase productivity. To a point. You can't pay somebody an absolute fortune. Productivity will get to a max. Okay, it's also an influence because employers will generally want to get as much out of a worker, an employee, with as little monetary compensation as possible. If they're aware of who has the potential greater bargaining power, i.e. a doctor has greater bargaining power, should you generally command a greater wage than, say, a cleaner, and nothing against cleaners, but they don't know what doctors do, then an effective or a smart HR manager will take this into account. What they'll offer a cleaner, someone working in retail, will be different to a doctor, a lawyer, a professor. Right, now the last dot point we look at today for these influences are ethics and CSR. Ethics and corporate social responsibility. This refers to what is right and wrong, the ethics, and doing what is socially correct and what society expects a business to do in relation to HR. Now, some examples of good HSR are two things. And these are things that are done, and then you need to think, okay, if you're in a workplace where things are done nicely, ethically, correctly, morally, your workers are going to be much happier, generally, unless they're ruthless. And so you look again at that HR effectiveness criteria, and much of those positive things are met. On the flip side, if you are a business that is ruthless, that has no ethical nous about you at all, then you're going to have these negative things in terms of your HR effectiveness criteria. So, two things where good CSR is happening. One is McDonald's and Ronald McDonald House. This is where Maccas have set up in the city areas places for people to stay who are from the country, who are not necessarily terminally ill, but seriously ill, and they require months of stay in hospital. It's not for the patient's place to stay. It's for the relatives to stay to look after them. So you might have a sick young child with leukemia, God forbid. And, the father and the mother want to be able to stay with their daughter. They can't sleep in the hospital the whole time. So Ronald McDonald House has accommodation that's nearby the hospital. So mum or dad, family members can stay so that the child has that support. And it's a pretty good thing. And people working in Macca's are aware of that. And it boosts morale. It boosts, happiness within the workplace, worker satisfaction. Another example is AGL. And for the most part, AGL don't do very great things sometimes. But one thing they are doing well is to pay the winter electricity bills for homeless shelters in New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia. So a homeless shelter, someone can't find a place to stay. They obviously need heating. These homeless shelters, the operators don't have a lot of money. And so what they will do is they will, AGL will pay to have it heated so that it's reasonably warm there in winter for them. Now, some additional positive impacts on HR when a business acts in an ethical way, I'll have a chat about in just a second. All right, so if you act in an ethical way, some things you will see are pleasant work environments, good community support, improved business performance, equal employment opportunities, and a positive image for the business to use for marketing. But if you act in a negative way, some negative consequences include greater accidents, greater injuries, greater stress, bullying, and discrimination, those sort of things. All right, guys, thank you again for listening to our YouTube clips, and I'll see you in class.